Hey there. So today we're going to take a look at our pedigree notes. So this is packet pages 185, 186, and 187. And I accidentally glued my two pages here backwards, but that's okay. They're in my notebook, and that's what matters. But we are going to go in order: 185, 186, 187. So just wanted to point that out in case you got a little confused here in a minute. But we're going to start basically with the basics of pedigrees. So, scientists, right, that study genetics, we know is called a geneticist. And so we are rarely able to actually use Punnett squares to help solve genetic problems in humans. Right, humans cannot be crossed in a lab to see what offspring they produce, right? That's testing on humans, and that's not legal. You can get in big trouble for that. So we can't just go and do a test cross with a man and a woman and see what offspring they're going to have. So instead, what we have to do is we would get data from a family that is affected by a possible genetic trait and try to figure out how that trait is inherited. So these geneticists are called genetic counselors, and they will use what's called a pedigree. They'll use pedigree information to predict the likelihood that a couple will have a child who is affected by a family trait or genetic disorder. So we'll basically kind of go backwards through the family history. We'll look at both grandparents, both great grandparents, to see if they have the trait and try to trace how that trait was passed, from parent to offspring. So the first type of inheritance that we're going to take a look at for our pedigree is called autosomal inheritance. So an autosomal trait is a trait that's caused by an allele in a gene on an autosome, right? And those are chromosomes that are not the X and Y. Remember, autosomes are the first 22 chromosomes. So, for example, right, dry earwax versus wet earwax. This is autosomal recessive. So our allele, right, our letter would be lowercase. Because it's recessive, we use a lowercase letter. So the genotype of an affected person would be homozygous recessive. And then autosomal dominant trait, having wet earwax, right? Since it's dominant, we'll use an uppercase letter, the letter E, right? Lowercase e, uppercase E. The genotype of an affected person, remember, could be two different ones. I can be homozygous dominant or heterozygous dominant. So we've got to figure out, right, the dominant one. So to use a pedigree, we have a couple components that we need to be able to identify. The first is called a marriage line. So a marriage line connects parents in a family. So these two individuals, right, they are married. And then we have a children line below the parents, right, showing siblings in the order of their birth. That is very important. So these two people, right, they are married and they have 3 children: oldest child, middle child, youngest child. In a pedigree, male individuals are represented by a square, and females are always represented by a circle. So here is, dad and mom, and then oldest daughter, middle daughter, and then youngest boy. So a key is used to show what type of shading represents the trait in question, and generations are labeled with Roman numerals, and individuals are labeled with numbers. So we have our key. So affected by dry earwax, right? Because this is a recessive trait. So we have generation 1, generation 2, okay? And then we need to figure out, right, what the genotype is for this family. So we know that this individual is affected by dry earwax, right? That's the recessive. So I know that this individual 2, has to be homozygous recessive because they're the only person that's affected, which means, right, mom and dad up here, right, they have wet earwax, but they had a child with dry earwax, which means they both have to be heterozygous. That's the only way two people with wet earwax could have a child with dry earwax. Now, for the other siblings here, we really don't have enough information to determine their genotype. No marriage lines or no children lines. So these individuals, right, we're not sure. Now, we know they have to be dominant, right? They have to have wet earwax because they're not affected, they're not shaded in. But we're not sure if they're homozygous or heterozygous dominant. Okay? So if that doesn't make sense, please go ahead and pause this video, message me so I can help you. Otherwise, let's move on. So packet page 186. So looking at an unknown trait. So a mysterious new trait or genetic disorder. Traits can be inherited in several different patterns. When doctors and scientists are studying a new genetic trait in a family, they try to figure out how the trait is inherited, and they look at a pedigree for clues. So we have a set of parents here, right? Generation 2, person 3, and generation 2, person 4. So generation 2, person 3, generation 2, person 4. So these two people are married. So these parents come to a doctor and a genetic counselor after becoming concerned with a rare blood disorder that 3 of their sons have. The mother tells the doctor that her father also suffered from a similar blood disorder. What is the most likely mode of inheritance for this blood disorder? So we see, right, mom here, dad, right, they're unaffected because they're hollow, they're not shaded in. But mom, her dad, he is affected. He had this blood disorder, and now 3 out of her 5 children have this disorder. So we need to figure out, right, what is the most likely mode of inheritance for this disorder. So we've got a couple clues. So first clue, grandpa up here, right, generation 1, person 1, grandpa has 3 children and none of them are affected. And, right, generation 2, person 3, I apologize, right, his daughter has affected children. So basically, it skipped a generation. It went from grandpa to grandsons. This means the disorder is most likely recessive because it skipped a generation, right? Grandpa has it, mom doesn't, but grandson does. So that's our first clue to what this mode of inheritance is. Clue number 2, right? Generation 1, individual 1 is male, and all of his grandchildren and all of his affected grandchildren are male. This suggests that the blood disorder allele is found on his X chromosome, which was passed to his daughter, right, individual 2, 3, and then passed on to 3 of his grandsons. All right, so individuals 3, 2, 3-3, and 3-5. So the grandpa here, right, all of his affected grandchildren are male. So the disorder's probably on his X chromosome that he gave to his daughter. So our conclusion, the blood disorder is most likely due to a recessive allele on the X chromosome. So this trait is sex-linked recessive. So if we were to kind of write in the genotype here, and I'm just going to, use a lowercase b for blood, right? So recessive, mom here, right? She got this, right? Her genotype, her mother gave her a regular dominant allele, but dad, the only thing he could give her is that recessive trait, and then mom passed that trait on to 3 out of her 4 sons, right? Because again, dad over here, right, he would be normal, and the only thing dad can pass on to his sons is the Y chromosome because they are male, which means there was a 50-50 shot that mom passed on the disorder to her sons, and she did. She did it 3 out of 4 times. So there are many different modes of inheritance. So autosomal recessive inheritance, the trait is caused by a recessive allele on an autosome, right, chromosome 1 through 22. Autosomal dominant, the trait is caused by a dominant allele on an autosome. X-linked dominance, the trait is caused by a dominant allele on the X chromosome. And then X-linked recessive, the trait is caused by a recessive allele on the X chromosome. So we can be autosomal dominant or recessive, or sex-linked dominant or recessive. And then 2 lesser known modes of inheritance. We have Y-linked inheritance. This is when the trait is found almost exclusively in males and caused by an allele on the Y chromosome. And then mitochondrial inheritance, the trait is inherited from the mother only and caused by mutation allele in a mitochondrial DNA gene. So we didn't talk a whole lot about mitochondrial DNA, but basically the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, has its own DNA, and that DNA is passed from mother to all of her children. So biological females, if you have children, you will pass on your mitochondrial DNA. And there can be disorders that are inherited through that DNA. If you'd like to learn more about mitochondrial DNA, let me know. It is pretty fascinating. So now that we've practiced, let's take a look over here at some sample pedigrees. So sample pedigree number 1, unattached earlobes is an autosomal dominant trait. I'm going to underline that. Attached earlobes are recessive. So we've got our key here. On the right, write the genotypes for each individual in the family. Use capital E for the unattached earlobes and lowercase e for the attached earlobes. How likely, okay, I'll come back to that here in a second. So let's write out our genotypes. So we know, right, unattached earlobes, right, is going to be 2 lowercase e's. So let's see, unattached earlobes. Oh, I'm sorry, it's autosomal dominant. This is a dominant trait. I apologize. So this is going to be a capital E. All right. So use capital E for unattached and then a lowercase e for attached. All right. So we know that this individual right here has to have a capital E, at least one of them. Because this person is unaffected, that means they have attached earlobes, and attached earlobes are recessive. So this person has to have 2 lowercase e's. So I'm going to write that right here. So I'm basically going to go through, and every individual I see that's not shaded in, I'm going to write in my homozygous recessive. So 1, 2, and 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 5, and 2, 6, and then 3, 3, and 3, 4. There we go. All right. So going back up to individual 1, they had children with attached and unattached earlobes, which means they had to be heterozygous. Let me write this in here so I don't forget. Okay. Let's take a look at individual generation 1, individual 4. So again, they had children that had both attached and unattached earlobes, so they had to be heterozygous. Now, individual 2, we are not sure, right? Let me see. They had to get, well, they are affected, right? So from mom, they got a lowercase e, and then from dad over here, they had to get an uppercase e because they're affected. And then the same thing for the brother, right? He has to be heterozygous. Mom gave the lowercase e, dad gave the uppercase e, so had to be that way. And then person 4 here, right? This guy's wife, person 4, she is affected. So dad here, right, gave the lowercase e. Mom had to give at least an uppercase e, right? Individual 1, 4. Right, we said had to be heterozygous. All right, there we go. Individual 3, 1. So both parents here, we just said, were heterozygous, but this person 3, 1, right? We know they have at least one uppercase E, but we don't know whether they are homozygous or heterozygous because they have no children for us to compare. Same thing for individual 3, 2, right? They could be homozygous or heterozygous. And then same thing for this last sibling. And so the only siblings we know for sure are the recessive ones that have attached earlobes. The unattached we're not sure of. So then the actual question, how likely is it that generation 2, person 3, and generation 2, person 4's next child will have unattached earlobes? Well, we know that they're both heterozygous, so if I were to draw a Punnett square out, I would say it's probably 50% chance of unattached earlobes, right? Because maybe both parents give an E. Let's see, let's draw it out real quickly. E. All right, so we're asking for unattached, so it'd be 75%. See, I'm glad I drew it out. 75%. There we go. Always draw your Punnett squares. So that's sample 1. All right, sample 2. So a family below goes to a doctor and asks the doctor to study a trait in their family that causes some individuals to have 6 fingers. Ooh, we talked about this. Polydactyly. Polydactyl. All right, so let's take a look. What is the most probable mode of inheritance for this 6-finger trait? So if I think back to over here, I see that this trait is in every single generation. So clues that led to my conclusion. I'm going to start with my clues. trait appears in all 3 generations. Let's see. So if this is 6 fingers, so it's definitely going to be dominant. So this male has it. He gave it to his daughters, and then this daughter got married. The husband's unaffected. Ooh, and then she had 2 sons that have it and a daughter that has it. So because the males are more affected, right, I think this is an X-linked trait because only the daughters here, right, are affected and none of the sons. So let's write this out and see what happens. So I think it's dominant, so I'm going to go with a capital P, Y. So none of the sons could have it because the only thing dad can give is a Y, which means to his daughters, right, they're all affected. So X, big P, X, little p. And then again, dad is normal, so the only thing he can give his sons is a Y. Mom, she had a 50-50 shot of giving them the trait or not. So clues, right, all daughters in generation 2 are affected. So what is the most probable mode of inheritance for this 6-finger trait? I think it is X-linked dominant. Because only daughters of this individual are affected and none of his sons. And a father with a dominant X trait would have all affected daughters, but he does not pass his X on to his sons. So this is going to be an X-linked dominant trait. So that's it for our notes on pedigrees. And again, we had 3 pages of notes, 185, 186, and then 187. So as always, if you have any questions or concerns about pedigrees or any of the examples we did here, just let me know. I'll see you next time.